Nightmarium, a simple card game about conquering nightmares, which is interesting when in the game actually you start without nightmares and you build the nightmares. So maybe you're catching them from the space where they live, I don't know. So Nightmarium, it's a small game, comes with an instruction booklet, with the player aids, very important, but the heart of the game is this big deck of cards that represent different parts of monsters. There are three parts, possible parts of monsters: legs, torso, and heads. And when you will build your monsters, you will have to build them in this order: from the legs, then torso, then legs, torso, head. Some parts of some cards represent parts that can work in different ways, and you need to look at this diagram here. So for example, this card here only works as a torso, which seems obvious. This one only has legs, but this one can be used as a torso or as a head, which took me a while to try to figure out. But if a head doesn't stop before the top edge, then probably can also be used as a torso. It gets more confusing when you have, say, legs, they can also be used as torsos. The art is actually very impressive. Everybody that played the game with me commented on that. And that may just be the best part of the game, sadly. Other important things. As you can see, the diagram at the bottom is surrounded by a color frame that indicates the legion, which is the family, the group of the monster. If you create a monster where all three cards belong to the same legion, you have an advantage. Then you have these other symbols here in the top left corner, not all cards, top left corner of the cards that have them, and they will give you different types of advantages and special effects. So you have your hand of cards, and during your turn you will perform two actions in any order, and you can perform the same action twice. Very simple. An action can be to draw two cards from the deck, just like that, or it can be to discard any number of cards and then draw half of that number from the deck. There is no maximum hand size. Or you can play a card from your hand, in which case you can, remember you have to follow the rules, start from the bottom, building them ground up. If you decide to play two cards in a turn, that is to spend both of your actions to play cards, then those cards have to be from the same legion. If we understand correctly the rules, they don't have to be part of the same monster, and so that would be a legal play if I played both of those cards that way. Remember, we were mentioning those symbols there in the top left corner. As soon as a monster is completed, the player that completed the monster gets to activate all of the symbols there, starting from the symbol on top and going down. If for whatever reason the action cannot be completed because it doesn't have a target, then that ends the monster activation and you do not get to activate the remaining abilities. The player aid will help you remember what those symbols with the abilities are. And the abilities are: reveal two cards from the deck and play them according to the rules. Draw two cards from the deck, play one card from hand. And here we get to the ones that are the most powerful and also, I shall say, controversial. Add the top card from any other player's creature, complete or incomplete, to your hand. So you just take off the head of a monster, for example, like this. Scavenger. Discard any incomplete creature belonging to another player. And I think you start to see what happens when these two are placed in this order on a single monster, because then you get to take off the head of a completed monster and then discard those using the Scavenger ability. That's a nasty, powerful combo. Devour. Discard the top card from any one of your creatures other than this one. Something else that I should also mention: when you complete a monster, if all three cards belong to the same legion, Then the other players immediately have to discard a card of that legion from their hand. If they don't have one, then they have to discard any 2 other cards. And this is pretty much the game. There's 2 actions which mainly will give you cards. You play cards, creating monsters and activating their effects when you complete a monster. The first player to complete 5 monsters wins the game immediately. Nightmarium really did not work for me and for my group. The problem is that it's massively random and there is no rubber banding. There definitely is what, to use the fancy term, is a positive feedback loophole. That is, to use those abilities, you need to create a monster. And after you create a monster, then you use those abilities that will prevent other people from creating more monsters. So that's the problem. The more monsters you create, the more you advance. In a 2-player game, of course, that's deadly. Pretty much when you create a monster or 2, you gain enough momentum, then you may just be able to win that way. And that's very anticlimactic. With more players, you may think, well, but you can gang up against the leader, which you can, but the game may also reach a sort of infinite loop or stasis situation, where everybody's constantly ganging against anybody who emerges, and you're constantly destroying monsters, and so it just takes forever before somebody emerges as the victor with 5 monsters, because it feels like the game is always in the same situation. And again, that's a problem, but the biggest problem to me is huge, massive randomness, and there is really nothing that you can do to mitigate that, because guess what? To do something other than to draw cards and play cards, that is, so to activate those abilities, you need to have been lucky before. You need to be lucky in order to be able to do interesting stuff. And on top of everything, the effect that makes people discard cards, that again increases the lead of whoever has started making monsters early on. And you're playing with 4 or 5 players, because of game effects, people making you discard cards, they destroyed most of your monsters, so they took away your hand entirely. Now your turn is, I draw 2 cards, then people get to play. I draw 2 more cards, people get to play. Maybe I play 1, and I draw 1, and somebody forces me to discard a card. Is just not the kind of game that we play in 2020. We live in a renaissance of board gaming, tabletop gaming, in which finally we have realized that players want to make decisions, players want agency. Drawing 2 cards from the deck as your turn just is not enough. So it's a game with a lot of randomness. If you only draw torsos, or you only draw feet, or feet and heads and no torsos, like it happened to me, nothing you can do about it. Massive randomness, limited agency, runaway leader problems, unless you gang up against the leader, but then the game sort of stalls because everybody's in that situation. So no, the game really is not a game that I feel like I want to play in the future. There are just so many better options these days. The art is great. The art is absolutely great, but unfortunately it's the only positive thing that I can mention about Nightmarium.